Hello, welcome to Creatureville. I'm Jeff. A few years ago, I had the idea of painting these Madballs on some of those round wooden plaques like you get at craft stores. And through the process of painting these, I had the idea of trying to come up with some of my own designs for Madballs. So the first one that I tried to do was kind of my own take on a Dracula Madball. And I was looking at it recently, and I thought to myself, it would be kind of cool to have an actual three-dimensional Madball that I can hold in my hands of this Dracula character. So I sat down and got to work and made a video of the entire process. So here it is. So I started off by doing a sketch in my physical sketchbook, which I don't do as often. A lot of times I just start and Procreate. But for this one, I really felt like just drawing on paper with a pencil first. And I wanted to not entirely redesign the look of this, but I did want to make it a little bit different from the painting. I thought the painting was a little bit too symmetrical. And so I just wanted to add a few extra little tweaks to it, or, just try to improve it a little bit. It's been a few years since I did the original, so and then I brought it into Nomad and started sculpting, and I've been using Nomad for about a year and a half, and I really enjoy it. And if you're looking to learn more about Nomad, I would recommend checking out Dave Reed on YouTube. He's got a ton of great tutorials. But after I finished the sculpture, I brought it into this slicing software, and this is called Box. And this is where I added supports and hollowed it out. Then I printed it out on my resin 3D printer and washed it off. Then I cured it in my low-budget curing station. And here's the final print. You can kind of see some of the skin texture that I added to it in the sculpture, but because it printed so small, it's not that easy to see. But it did leave behind some little bumps from all of the supports, so I have to do some wet sanding. Just dip the sandpaper in some water and sand it off. It left some scratches behind, but after I finish priming and painting, you won't even see that anymore. For the priming, I just used some Rust-Oleum spray-on primer. It's primer and paint. I did a base coat of this neon flame blue color from Montana Gold. I wanted to paint it in a similar color scheme as this mask that they sold at Target during Halloween from 2024, but it ended up looking a little bit different from that, but I'm okay with it. I started by putting down a layer of white paint over the areas where I was going to be painting these neon paint colors. Neon paint tends to be pretty thin, so I wanted to make sure that it had white underneath it so that the colors would really pop and be their true color. For the eyes, I used a Liquitex Basics fluorescent pink. When it dried, it looked more red than I was expecting, but actually liked the way it turned out. From there, I just repeated the process of putting down a layer of white and then painting the solid colors over that. I didn't have a neon purple paint, so I just went with like a regular purple, but I think it looks okay. It's not that big of a deal. You may have noticed the hole on the bottom of the sculpture. That is from the printing process. When you're printing something on a resin printer, it's good to hollow your sculptures out because it saves on the amount of resin that you use. But when you hollow it out, you also need to make sure to leave a hole in the sculpture so that it doesn't explode. And by explode, I don't mean it blows up, it just sort of cracks and the uncured resin will leak out. And I know that because I learned that lesson the hard way. For the tongue, I used a different brand of paint. I used the Craft Smart acrylic paint that they sell at Michael's and Walmart. And it's even thinner than the Liquitex. So I had to put more layers of this down so the tongue would be solid, but it actually turned out okay, I thought. And then from there, I just painted these veins a darker blue and painted the inside of the irises black. At this point, I basically just filled in all the areas that needed to be black. And this step is always pretty satisfying for me whenever I do a painting that has a black line or has dark areas that need to be filled in, it always tends to kind of make it look a little more finished and clean. On to the UV resin. So this resin cures under UV light, and I just poured a few drops into the recesses of the eyes, and it created this little dome effect like you would have on your actual eyeball. The only problem is it left these bubbles. So my solution for it was to just paint black over those areas. And when I was done, it looked like it still kind of needed something to me, so I decided to add some neon yellow irises around the black areas, which I think made him look a little more scary and crazy looking, so definitely a plus. A while back I bought some resin dyes from Michaels, and this is the first time I've actually used it with the UV resin. I mixed up a little bit of red to add some blood dripping down out of the corner of his mouth, and I used the end of another paintbrush to just kind of dip it in and then let it drip down a little bit, and then I would expose it to the UV light and then add a little bit more until it looked the way I wanted it to. And then I just took an old paintbrush and dipped it in the clear UV resin and then brushed it on the eyeballs and the teeth and the tongue and the inside of the mouth so that they would all look wet. And he's already looking nice and creepy. I added some more of the blood in his little bite marks, had it dripping down just a little bit. Then I added just a little bit of a darker blue around his eyes. I got this set of airbrush paints for Christmas and used the blue color to add some shadows and more of the recessed areas to kind of give it a little bit more depth. And there it is. I think that looks a lot better. It's not quite as flat as it was before. I wanted to paint this in a few different colorways, so the next one I did was green, which is my favorite color for monsters. For this I spray painted it iguana green from Montana spray paints, and then after that I went in with my airbrush and just added some more darker green into the recessed areas. The resin that I use comes with these little paint brushes, so I just took one of them and cut some of the bristles down a little bit to add some texture. I just dipped it in some darker green that was a little bit watered down and flicked the paint onto it. The next few steps are basically the same as the last Madball. I just painted a layer of white and then put the solid colors on top of that. I painted the teeth on this one a little bit differently. I started with a brown layer of paint to give him some baked bean teeth. Then I dry brushed over that with a little bit of yellow ochre and white to make his teeth look a little more dirty and monstrous. And then from there, I added some more details to the tongue. I painted some veins on the underside. And then mixed in a little bit of white to the pink that I painted the tongue with and painted over the little bumps and raised areas on the tongue. And then from there I just did a little bit of dry brushing. And there it is. Now I'm just filling in all the black areas. Then I painted his lips a slightly darker green from the rest of the skin tone. I got these little brushes from a hobby store a while back, and I haven't really had much of a use for them until now, but they were perfect for adding these little dots of paint in the irises. From there I just added some UV resin in the eyes like I did on the last one. and this one also had bubbles in the eyes. But instead of painting over it, this time I decided to drill it out and start over. This step made me really nervous. I was afraid I was going to drill too far and ruin the sculpture, but luckily it worked out okay. I just repainted it and then added more resin and then cured it again. I didn't really do anything different this time. I just got lucky that there weren't a lot of bubbles this time around. But I know that you can use a heat gun to potentially get some of the bubbles out. Then I just mixed up some more blood and added it to the side of his mouth. And added a couple of little dots of blood into the bite holes, which I think looked a lot better on this one than it did on the last one. Time for the final Madball. This one printed a little bit bigger than the other two, and it was completely unintentional, but I actually like the size of this a lot better. I started off by spray painting it in a royal blue, and then I used a technique a friend of mine told me about where I take this teal color and I sprayed it from above, so that way it almost gives it like a shadow effect, so a lot of the details in the face would show a little more. And then on top of that I add a little bit of white. Here I'm adding more of the skin texture like I did on the last one, but with different colors obviously. The rest of the process is basically a step and repeat from the last two that you saw, so I don't really have much else to say about it at this point. I'll just let you watch the rest of the process without my commentary.